What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and it's Monday, which means it's time to talk through my top 10 lessons learned for fantasy football from week 11 of the fantasy football season as we look forward to week 12 and so on. This is where I look through usage trends, data, nuggets, everything you need to know so you don't spend hours looking through box scores trying to figure out what happened yesterday and what is actually useful that happened from yesterday. So with all that being said, we have 10 lessons to get into as always. First up here, we have the rookie receiver report. As always, if you're new here, subscribe, leave a like, and make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. They are what keep the lights on during, the November times, the December times on the channel. But make sure you use promo code RON. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. And of course, if you're a new customer, they have a free pick for you every single time over on the Pick'em lobby. You can get a higher 0.5 total yards free pick where you can then ladder in NBA tonight, NFL tonight. I think that they're even like sprinkling in some college basketball. I'm jealous of somebody that's out of network when it comes to Pick'ems. But if you are in a state where it works out, that seems like a great time. Of course, that's going to be down below in the description and the comment section down below. Now, when it comes to the rookie receiver report, this is what we always do. Our first lesson, our first takeaway is we look at what happened with the rookies. Now, this is rookie wide receivers and tight ends with 100 or more routes sorted by PFF grade. Of course, we add Jermaine Burton, and we have route percentage, so that's just how many of the pass plays is the player running a route on. Are you getting on the field? Targets per out run, are you commanding volume on a per out basis? Yards per out run, are you efficient on a per out basis in terms of yards? First downs per out run, are you not only being efficient and creating big chunk plays, but are you moving the chains? And then PFF grade, do you look good on film? And then the change week to week in terms of your PFF grade, like how much are you improving on your week 10 PFF grade? You can see here, despite being an absolute monster, Brock Bowers is still increasing his PFF grade. He has a 90 PFF receiving grade. If I go into my database, I think the only receivers to hit a 90 plus PFF grade as a rookie is 100% OBJ did, and Jefferson's probably right there. So that's the rare air Brock Bowers is in right now. If you want to look at this stat from Austin Gailey, I never know if it's Gailey or Gale. So anybody who knows Austin, let me know. I know he worked at PFF for a while. But Brock Bowers has 70 catches, the most of any rookie in weeks 1 through 11 this millennium. Yes, that includes Puka Nacua, who had 69 after week 11 in his record-breaking season last year. So he just had 16 targets, 13 catches, 126 yards, a touchdown as a tight end attached to, I believe it was Gardner Minshew this week. He's had like 3 different quarterbacks this year. He's still producing. Do not let this season go by without appreciating Brock Bowers' greatness. I truly do think you can make a case for him as Rookie of the Year with Jaden Daniels slowing down and Bo Nix kind of muddying all the quarterback talks. Like, if you just want to talk rookie at his position, being an absolute monster, I think Brock Bowers is my Offensive Rookie of the Year. And then, of course, per route stats, he's pacing with the receivers. You know what I mean? He has the highest first downs per out run. 2.23 yards per out run is in the Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey range. 27.1% targets per out run is behind just Malik Neighbors in terms of full-time receivers. Monster. Now, I don't usually talk about guys who are on bye, but we'll talk about Malik Neighbors here because it got ruled this morning that Daniel Jones would not be starting, and most people who I believe are rational were expecting Drew Lock, but that is not the case. All right, we now have Tommy DeVito. This is not good. All right, I feel bad because I did have him as a trade target not too long ago. I think I had him on a trade target on Saturday or Friday's video. This is worst case scenario. I never thought that this was in the cards. They paid Drew Lock a $5 million 1-year deal to just come in and be the backup, and they are instead kind of like blatantly tanking here. I kind of respect it, but from a fantasy football perspective, this is bad. This is somebody we were kind of hoping after the bye could bounce back as a really light schedule coming up here, but instead we go from Daniel Jones, who isn't good. He is the quarterback of the 26th ranked EPA per play offense right now, 34.1 pass attempts per start, 207 passing yards per start. That's not great, but that's fine. Now we go to Tommy DeVito. 152.2 passing yards per start. That is like a downgrade of 50 yards passing. And then pass attempts per start, 24.8 in terms of last year's number. So you're losing about 50 yards of passing, about 10 pass attempts, and you're losing the EPA per play like 26 versus 29th. That's not a big deal, but minus 0.061 versus minus 0.15. That's more than double past 0, if that makes sense. Like if you go to 0, minus 0.061, and then minus 0.150, not good at all. We're going to get more, I don't even know. We're going to get less sustained drives. We're going to get a more run-heavy offense. And it's just going to be bad for Malik Neighbors. I'm trying to spin a positive for you guys, but it's just not great. You hope Tommy DeVito comes in and like maybe he outdoes some of these numbers. It seems like Dable kind of just packed it in last year. He probably will do that again. But the offense has been a little bit better this year where it looks more like the 2022 Giants. Maybe that can kind of stay with us here. But I don't know. I think you're going to get more rushing, or you're going to get as much rushing. But I think overall it's going to be a more run-heavy team. So that's it's tough. I wish I could come on here and I looked through the stats. I tried to find something that you could hold on to and say, well, maybe this time. You need to kind of hope that Tommy DeVito has improved in his second year as a starter, and I would not hold my breath there. Now, moving on from that, we have Ladd McConkey. Coming off arguably his best game as a pro, he got hurt. That's the reason that the 77% route participation is lower than 90%. He got hurt. He comes back, still gives you 9 targets, 6 catches, 123 yards, and he is now comfortably over 80 PFF grade. That is huge. He gets a 3.6 positive change on the week. Ladd McConkey arrows all the way up as a top 24 receiver, and we'll talk later on. This Chargers offense, really, really good for fantasy. After that, we have another guy who is now back up to 80-plus PFF receiving grade. The reason we care about that, by the way, is last year, Rashi was that, Puka was that. I want to say Tank Dell was in there as well. And then you could go back through all the years. Like London cleared it, Olave cleared it, Garrett Wilson cleared it. Of course, OBJ, Mike Evans, Michael Thomas, all these studs. Their rookie year, they had an 80-plus PFF grade. It's one of the best indicators we have, and we want receivers who stay over that. So Brian Thomas gets back there. And I thought this was a good Ryan Heath tweet, pointing out that weeks 1 through 8, he had a 19.4% target share, 71.6 receiving yards per game. Then he injures his chest in week 8. Things go back down. Then in week 11 today, he had a nice bounce back at a 24.1% target share, 82 receiving yards. So he goes on to the bye this week. He comes back. Maybe Trevor Lawrence comes back with him. I don't know. But it does at least show us that with Mac Jones, he can have a fine day in fantasy, and he should be good to go moving forward. After that, we have Xavier Worthy. After declaring him dead last week, I look like a bit of an idiot, but I still kind of would double down on that, man. We're talking 15% targets per out run. Like, that's okay. That's, in this Ricky Pearsall, AJ Barner type of area. It is, below your Odunze's, Keon Coleman's. But, he is competing for targets with Hopkins and Kelsey. He hasn't been efficient at all at 1.02 yards per out run, 5.6% first downs per out run, and still less than a 60 PFF grade. Now, he did increase his PFF grade by 2.2 this week. He did have 5 targets, 4 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown. It was his second best game in terms of yards per out run, his second best game in terms of PFF grade. So this is good. I would still be trying to sell high off of this game, whether that's in redraft or dynasty, but I will also extend the olive branch that if you're out there and you've been a Xavier Worthy bag defender, if you want to see this positive, this good game for him and want to just hold on to that the rest of the way and say, I want to see this through, I think you absolutely could if you would like to. It's not 100% dead for Xavier Worthy, despite me thinking that last week. Then we have Devon Vele, the 25-year-old rookie. He has his highest graded game of the season. He increases his PFF grade by 3.6. 5 targets, 4 catches, 66 yards. I don't know what was so spectacular about that, the PFF, but for a rookie, he looks good across the board. He's just a lot older than we'd like for a rookie. Then you have A.D. Mitchell, just doing A.D. Mitchell things. Sadly, the biggest note is no Pittman. 95% of the routes, Pittman comes back down to 16%. But in A.D. Mitchell fashion, he does what A.D. Mitchell does, runs less than 10 routes, commands targets, is efficient. He gives you 5 routes, 1 target, 1 catch, 33 yards, dust Sauce Gardner, should have been a touchdown. So that gets him to 6.6 yards per out run on the day and a 20% targets per out run, and still on the season. Of course, his per out numbers are all really, really good, increasing that PFF grade. Long-term in Dynasty, I am buying and holding A.D. Mitchell. In redraft, sadly, you need a Pittman injury for him to be startable again. Then we'll talk about Ricky Pearsall here. Sadly, he kind of reverts back. 64% of the routes is not great, right? He was at 71% the week prior. You'd think with Kittle out, this would have gone up to 75%, 80%, but I suppose not. We're getting more McCaffrey. It's just not great for Ricky Pearsall. I would say trending down, even though I talked him up last week, that now it seems like with McCaffrey firmly getting back into the mix, them needing to win these games as well. Maybe they don't want to screw around with a rookie in crunch time in these scenarios. He gives you 2 targets, no production on those. Everything across the board took a hit this week for Ricky Pearsall. Then we have the rest. We'll talk. I mean, this one is brutal. Jermaine Burton earlier in the year makes a couple big plays down the field, and it's like, man, why can't he get on the field more? Well, he's falling asleep in meetings. Then he finally gets back the good graces of his coaching after an inactive, 53% and 25%. This went down because of T. Higgins. He's been 9 targets. He's been targeted 9 times the last 2 weeks. He has turned in 2 catches for 19 yards. Brutal. So he's finally got on the field. He's doing nothing with his targets, and he's probably not going to get those opportunities much more as the Bengals are in win now, sound the alarm mode, and they have T. Higgins back in the mix. What you're kind of hoping for is Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both want new deals this offseason. Maybe you get a stretch from like week 14 on where the Bengals, maybe they lose out the next 2 or 3 games and all of a sudden T and Chase aren't playing, or like they rolled their ankles. I don't know. I'm making stuff out of pure thin air here. Most likely Jermaine Burton is kind of dead, at least in 2024. Then you have A.J. Barner. He's filling in for Noah Fant. He had the worst graded week of his season, minus 4.3 here. I couldn't tell you what it was. I didn't see any I didn't see any fumbles. Maybe he dropped a pass or 2, but he gives you 2 catches, 15 yards. I'm much less stingy when it comes to tight ends. These per route numbers for a rookie tight end are pretty much fine. Troy Franklin, he had his best graded day of the season, but it was just 2 catches, 15 yards, and a touchdown in a big blowout. Nothing really to see here. Still good targets per out run numbers. And then Jalen Polk. He gets no targets in this one, runs 33% of the routes. He gets, thrown under the bus by Gerard Mayo after the game, where he says that they had a 100% touchdown on this play if Jalen Polk didn't screw up. So things are pretty dang over for Jalen Polk. And the last guy we'll talk about, I saved him for last, we're going to lead into a Bears segment here for our second lesson learned, but we have Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze, he's not going to pop in PFF grade. He's not going to pop in any of these per out numbers, but we talked about it before. I'm giving him some grace when it comes to that because his quarterback play hasn't been amazing. He's been in a receiver room with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. It's just a different dynamic than most of these other guys, but he increased his PFF grade by 2.1, which is good. He had his second best graded PFF game of the year with 10 targets, a team leading 10 targets, 6 catches, 65 yards. He was startable this week, and he had a 32% target share, which was the best of the season for Rome Odunze. So first week with a new offensive coordinator, right? No Shane Waldron, and Rome Odunze is kind of the centerpiece of this offense. That is huge, and I think that just kind of speaks to his talent level in a room with DJ Moore, with the resources they have invested in DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. That Rome Odunze, I think he leads the receiver room right now in receiving yards for the entire season. So Rome Odunze, again, he's not going to pop here, but I would have him right in the probably just right neck and neck with Ladd McConkey in Dynasty moving forward as like a top 15 to 20 wide receiver. And then we'll talk about the Bears. The Bears without Shane Waldron, it was pretty good. It wasn't great, right? 19 points. It wasn't like the greatest game of all time, but it was a nice step in the right direction for Caleb Williams. He didn't make any mistakes. I don't think he threw any picks, which he's been doing lately. He didn't throw any touchdowns either, but it's a good passing chart, right? Like he's throwing it all around. Not a lot over the middle of the field. You like a little bit more between the hashes there, but, to the outside, easy completions, doing what he's told. And then also the game was graded well by PFF, which is nice to see, where that's his game, week 11 across the bottom. 7.5 yards per attempt. That'll play. 80.4 was his second highest graded passing game of the season for him on PFF. He had 2 big-time throws, no turnover-worthy plays, which is nice. He had 5 scrambles. The biggest thing for him was his scrambling ability, which we care about for fantasy. He had 5 scrambles, tied for the most he's had all season, and 70 rushing yards was the most he's had all season. So he is scrambling more. He's getting more design rushes. He's being more of a threat on the ground. And if we can see him convert a couple passing touchdowns here, he then comes back into focus as somebody we can start in fantasy football. Now, again, when we talk about this wide receiver usage, Rome Odunze was up top with 10 targets, but Keenan Allen gets 8. DJ Moore gets 7. DJ Moore, gives you a modest 13.7 PPR points on the day. That's fine. I kind of think Keenan Allen's just a little bit cooked. 8 targets, turned that into 4 catches, 41 yards. I don't know when you'll ever feel good about starting him. Keenan Allen's kind of a drop. He kind of has been. But DJ Moore, slight upgrade. He goes from somebody that's not really going near my lineup to probably a back end wide receiver 3. If we can see this offense continue to trend up. Then we'll talk about Cole Kmet. This one's nice. He didn't really turn it into anything here, right? Just 10% of the targets. He didn't really have a great day. But the big thing here, as we're seeing from the Fantasy Life utilization report, make sure you check out fantasylife.com. I think it's Matthew Berry's site. Dwayne McFarland does great work over there. And you can see 87% of the routes is the most he's ran all season down there in week 11. It just didn't turn into targets, which is fine. It just more solidifies the fact that Gerald Everett was a Shane Waldron guy, and now Gerald Everett has been completely, banished to the shadow realm, which is really nice for Cole Kmet. And then the RB split was really interesting in this game when we talk about Shane Waldron as the play caller. You had DeAndre Swift go from, again, this is the utilization report, go from 68% of the snaps, 89% of the rush attempts, down to 54% of the snaps, 48% of the rush attempts. I think a lot of those rush attempts also went to Caleb Williams, so remember that as well. His route stayed about the same, but if you look at the SDD snaps, that's the short down and distance, so short yardage, right? 3rd and goal, 4th and short, 3rd and short, whatever. He went from 100% to 13%. We're seeing that now slide in the favor of Roschon. Inside the 5 attempt, that went from DeAndre Swift. Well, he had 0% in week 10. I just want to say that there wasn't a ton of those opportunities in week 10. Week 11, that got ceded to Roschon Johnson. Then you can see long down and distance in 2-minute drills, so passing down situations. DeAndre Swift just 9% across the board in week 11. Before that was about like 35% and 42%. So what we're seeing here is Roschon Johnson is now the short down and distance, like the short yardage back, so goal line, and then also the 3rd down back. So that's actually really nice for Roschon, where he gives you some upside off the bench as somebody who got 11 touches in this game. He had a touchdown, 11.1 PPR points, which will play. He was a top 24 running back on the week. And again, goal line usage, receiving usage, those are the two things we really want for efficiency. DeAndre Swift gets a downgrade here, but he did still give you 16 touches and a touchdown, but he kind of just gave you a lucky touchdown. Besides that, the usage took a step back in this game. Now, after that, I did want to mention, just as part of this takeaway, is the Packers wide receiver rotation. This is another tool, shout out to Fantasy Life, where this is over the last 3 weeks, showing all of the different Packers receivers. Christian Watson and Jaden Reed have both run about 70% of the routes, but you're seeing Christian Watson, 27% targets per out run, 22% of the targets on an 18.7 yard ADOT. He has been startable the last 3 weeks. So moving forward, Christian Watson's like a boom-bust wide receiver 3, and Jaden Reed sadly gets kind of downgraded to this like boom-bust wide receiver 2. He only got like 2 catches and 1 carry in this game. Not good. The Jaden Reed fear is warranted. I've been seeing a lot of that today, but you did see Christian Watson get 19 PPR points this past week. So, it's now split between those top 3 in terms of receiving usage. Now, I will say I wouldn't panic on anybody on the Packers at this point. They just played the Bears. The Bears, while they're very dysfunctional and Eberflus is maybe on his way out, they are a very good defense. So you're not just going to have, a 300-yard passing game against that team with much ease. Then after that, I have my never trust Sean Payton takeaway here, which is pretty brutal. I feel like a goof for trusting that Sean Payton was actually going to use Estime. Right after last game, where Estime dominated the touches, dominated the snaps, we go back to this game versus the Falcons, in a game where they killed the Falcons. Javonte gets 14 opportunities, 56% of the snaps, 6 out of 10 of the 3rd down snaps, all 3 of the inside the 10 snaps. Brutal stuff. This data is from Dave Richard here. So Estime gets relegated all the way back. He has 9 opportunities, which is nice. 18% of the snaps, not great. 14% for Jaleel McLaughlin, and 4 opportunities for Jaleel McLaughlin. So it's a 3-way split. Javonte is probably going to be at the top here, but it's just a very unpredictable situation moving forward. When you start any of these running backs, of course, Javonte and Estime, there is a very wide range, and the floor is quite literally 0. So just something to think about when you have those guys. And I will say, small shout out to the Falcons. Of course, the Falcons lose, and they don't score a ton of points, so Bijan doesn't give you a great day. But 93% of the snaps going to Bijan, just 7% to Algier, is probably the biggest split we've seen so far. So that's nice. But in a loss like this, I don't know that sticks moving forward. We shall see. But then I also want to give some appreciation to Bo Nix as we talk about the Broncos here. Bo Nix has been good, man. he's been good. Like, it's time to actually kind of respect him. Now, these are the 17 rookie quarterbacks since the merger to hit 17 plus points per game. Where on the spectrum of, like, Marcus Mariota, Jameis Winston, Baker Mayfield, all the way to Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, Dak Prescott, Kyler, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Andrew Luck, where he's on that spectrum long term, I don't know. But he scores fantasy points, and he's at least not dead in the water, Zach Wilson, Bryce Young, Josh Rosen territory. He is a hit. Now, the magnitude of that hit when it comes to Dynasty, who knows? We'll talk about that in the offseason. But in terms of redraft, he gave you 300 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and is pretty much like a top 12 quarterback the rest of the way for fantasy football. And he's somebody where it's going to be hard to get yourself to do it, but you are now in conversations where you should be starting Bo Nix over like Mahomes, over CJ Stroud. I'm trying to think of like other premier quarterbacks who just aren't really panning out right now, but those are the two that stick out. We'll see how CJ Stroud does tonight with Nico Collins. Maybe that gets him to bounce back, but there's some premier quarterbacks that you drafted highly that Bo Nix should probably be starting over moving forward. And I will say, something to feel good about long-term with Bo Nix. This is one of my favorite things we've been looking at these past few years, and why we loved Anthony Richardson so much was he holds on to the ball a lot, which isn't great, but if you hold on to the ball a lot and you don't take sacks, that is huge. That's a superpower. You are extending plays, you are finding guys open in scramble drills, and it gives you another aspect of your game. And as long as you aren't taking bad sacks because of it, that is a good thing. Now, Bo Nix has the 5th highest time to throw at 3.09 seconds. He's holding the ball for a long time, but his 14.3% pressure to sack rate, so that is just what percentage of pressures are turning into sacks, 14.3% is very low. That's the 8th lowest in the league. And there's almost a very easy correlation of the longer you hold on to the ball, the higher pressure to sack rate you have. And Bo Nix having the 5th highest time to throw, but then the 8th lowest pressure to sack rate is huge. That is right up there with a guy we'll talk about in a second, Richardson. Brock Purdy's in that range as well in terms of guys who hold on to the ball but don't take a lot of sacks. It's just really good. And I do think that Brock Purdy is like a decent comp for Bo Nix as kind of like what he can be at his like absolute best in the league. Let's talk about Anthony Richardson, someone who has that superpower as well. And he has probably his best game, definitely the best game of the season, probably the best game of his career. He gives you 28.1 PPR points. This is our 4th takeaway here. And this is his PFF game logs. And we look at week 11 compared to the rest. He has his highest passing grade day where he has an 80-plus pass grade. His best fantasy output of the year, 28.1. Best yardage output of the season, 272. Best completion percentage output. He gives you, 1 TD, 9.1 yards per attempt, 272 yards, 66.7% completion percentage. You can see at the end there, 9.6 yard ADOT. So kind of dialing him in, giving him a little more balance, and then an 88.5% adjusted completion percentage. All really, really good stuff. He did have one turnover-worthy play, according to PFF. And the biggest thing for him, I thought from a fantasy perspective, was him on the ground. 10 carries, 32 yards. Isn't like amazing, but 10 carries, 32 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He was used in the red zone. And the big thing here is that he had 0 scrambles. So all 10 of those rush attempts were designed. And that's huge. If he can stay healthy, that's where you see the fantasy upside, is when they call those like QB powers and GT counters and all those, fancy QB runs. That is huge, especially when they use them inside of the goal line, because again, 6 points for a rushing touchdown versus 4 points for a passing touchdown. That's when you start to get like breaking fantasy upside. So Anthony Richardson, very, very good stuff. I will say the Jets defense isn't great, but there's a chance that this like 2-week break was actually very good for him. Anthony Richardson, arrow up moving forward. Now, what that means to the rest of the offense, let's talk about JT. JT, not great. The issue is with JT is that he's having amazing usage. He had 24 rushes, 2 targets. That's 26 touches, about all you could ask for preseason. If you told me JT would average 26 touches per game, I would say I would draft him in the top 5. He turned that into just 7 PPR points. I will say he didn't get the boost from Anthony Richardson's rushing he usually does, but the Jets on the ground were just very good against the run. Again, 3.2 yards per carry to Richardson. JT did nothing on the ground today. It's tough. I do wonder how much the injury is affecting him. You can see from Jeff Mueller and James Boyd, he's been getting his right ankle tamed up, which isn't good. He's had ankle issues since, 2021, 2022. If that's still an issue, That's not great. He's at like 15 points per game right now as an RB2. That's probably all he is if he can't find some efficiency here, which I have some hope that he will. But if this injury is actually a big deal, then I don't have that much hope. Then we'll talk about Michael Pittman. His first game back, of course, we talked about it earlier. Sadly relegates A.D. Mitchell even behind Ashton Doolin in terms of snaps. I guess I like Ashton Doolin blocking more than like A.D. Mitchell. Just 5 routes for A.D. Mitchell. Josh Downs gets home with, what did he get? He got a touchdown, I believe. Yeah, he got 5 catches, 84 yards, and a touchdown. Alec Pierce, 3 for 74 is like not bad at all. Michael Pittman, 8 targets, leads the team, 5 catches, 46 yards, drops a pass for, that would have been like a 20-plus yard gain. I still don't think he's 100%. I'm not really, I don't know. I'll still be disrespecting Michael Pittman in fantasy ranks, whether that's rest of season, whether that's dynasty, whether that's weekly. I just don't think he's 100%, and I also think that he might be a little bit overrated for what we've kind of liked from him over the past, few years. Josh Downs, to me, is the best receiver in that room, and he quietly has 20-plus points per game in his last 2 games with Anthony Richardson. I think that he's just too good to fail and somebody that I'm not going to be panicking on too much because of the QB change. Then our 5th takeaway is Jauan Jennings is just really, really good at football, man. He's really, really good at football. I'm blown away by it. These are some stats that I've gathered here. One from Jacob Gibbs where he was using fantasy points here, I believe, where they look at first read target share. So on a pass play, who's the first read? Week 8, right after the Ayuk injury, Deebo's at 41%, Kittle is at 35%. Then week 10 comes around, Jauan Jennings is in this game, and even with Deebo, even with Kittle, Jennings goes to a 39% first read target share. So he is the guy. When they need someone to get open, he is the first read, and then they're looking to Kittle, then they're looking to Deebo. Same thing in week 11, 45% for Jauan Jennings. They are building the offense out of Jauan Jennings. He is their, I would call him wide receiver 1 moving forward as a fine wide receiver 2 rest of the way, where he is now top 24 in points per game at wide receiver despite games where he's been hurt or playing with Ayuk for the entirety of the season. He is a top 24 wide receiver in points per game. He has demoted Deebo, and we have this stat as well. In the 3 games where he has logged 60% or more of the snaps, 11, 175 and 3, 7 for 93, 10, 91 and 1. Just really, really good stuff from Jennings. He is somebody that needs to be in your lineup the rest of the way. And then we can also talk about Deebo, who people are getting very frustrated with. Or actually, no, this is still, or no, it's not. But we can still talk about Deebo, him getting demoted from the first read stuff, as we saw with this tweet. It's not great. He's now kind of their gadget guy. He's not their first read at wide receiver despite no Ayuk. Jennings just kind of filling that role. McCaffrey's back to take away some of those rushing opportunities. Deebo still had 8 opportunities, which is good. He's just not as efficient this year. He's just having a down year. That's going to happen with Deebo, where he's kind of, up and down when it comes to efficiency. This looks a lot more like his 2022 season than his 2021, of course. So he becomes kind of like a back-end boom-bust wide receiver 2. I still think he's going to score touchdowns and have a couple big plays here and there, but it's not going to happen often enough for you to feel great about Deebo in your starting lineup. And then in that same game, I wanted to touch on JSN as well, who I am just very impressed with, man. I was very critical of him early on, where his yards per out run was worse than it was as a rookie through the first 7 weeks. He looked awful. Even without DK Metcalf, he wasn't producing. And in the last 3 weeks, he's just sort of flipped a switch, man, where you can see that this is his yards per out run for the entire season, only over 2 yards per out run once. And then weeks 8, 9, and 11, he is over 2 yards per out run in all of them, over 3 in his last 2. He's a top 24 wide receiver until further notice on a weekly basis, rest of season, anything like that. And he's the wide receiver 3 in points per game over that 3-game stretch. So he's just been really good. They're using him downfield more. That 8.5 yard ADOT is nice. That's what we're looking for. 8.5, 9, something like that, where they're not using him just at the line of scrimmage. That will be huge for JSN. Then our 6th takeaway. This was the Taysom Hill week, man. This was the Taysom Hill week. This is Taysom Hill's breakdown here from PFF. 8 snaps at quarterback, 7 in the backfield, 9 in line as a tight end, 5 out of the slot, 4 out wide, 3 in kick return, 3 in punt coverage, 5 in punt return for 44 total snaps across special teams, across offense. It's wonky usage. I would even maybe say that it's cheesery, the way that he's being used in fantasy football circles right now. But if he is a legal tight end in your league, he is probably a top 6 tight end rest of the way, where even with Foster Moreau and even with Jauan Johnson, he still had 18 routes run, so about 60% of the routes, 10 targets. 10 targets on 18 routes run is ridiculous. 7 carries, and they've won the last 2 games kind of building around Taysom. That's something they're going to latch on to moving forward as like Taysom Hill, the new coach with Riz or whatever, they're building around Taysom Hill. They're building the house out of Taysom Hill. And he gave you a 40-plus PPR point game this week. I do want to actually read out the box score because it is just so ridiculous. But just an absolutely ridiculous day. Like an all-time fantasy football day. I don't know if any of you guys started him. I know I had him as like a top 12 tight end this week. I don't think anyone expected this. I'm trying to see. What did he actually give you? So he gave you an interception. He gave you 18 passing yards. He gave you 7 carries, 138 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. And then he gave you 8 catches for 50 yards. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. He is an absolute monster at this point. And he is the tight end 3 in points per game this season. He goes into a bye here. Coming out of it, though, it's tough because a lot of this is happening because Jamal Williams and Kendra Miller are both hurt. Jamal Williams might be back sooner rather than later. And if that happens, it might dampen things on Taysom Hill, but I like to see it first, right? Because it just seems like they might just be sort of building their identity. They're 2-0 with a new coach. They've been using Taysom Hill a lot. It might just be something that they do moving forward. So I'm not going to pour any cold water on Taysom Hill moving forward. Then we have the Jameis Winston effect on the other side of this game, our 7th takeaway. This is put really well by Hayden. In terms of fantasy usage, Cedric Tillman is the wide receiver 8, Judy the wide receiver 14, Elijah Moore the wide receiver 15. Now, I wish he put David Njoku in here, but it's just crazy that like 3 of the 4 pass catchers are getting home in any given week just because Jameis Winston is Jameis Winston. He threw the ball 46 times yesterday, 395 passing yards. Judy gives you 6 for 142 and a touchdown. And Njoku 9 for 81 will get it done at tight end. Elijah Moore 6 for 66 and a touchdown. That'll get it done. Now, sadly, we were on Cedric Tillman in the Stats and Starts show. He was the odd man out this week. He still got 8 targets. I'm not panicking on Cedric Tillman at all. He has still been absolutely amazing. And if you want to look at the splits since week 7, so this is since Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles, Jameis Winston comes in to finish that game. Since week 7, in terms of points per game, Tillman is wide receiver 8, Judy is wide receiver 22, Elijah Moore is wide receiver 29, and Njoku is tight end 5. So that is a top 12 receiver, a top 24 receiver, a top 36 receiver. So a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and a top 5 tight end over that span. Really, really good for fantasy football. And then we have the running back split, where Jerome Ford has been getting a lot more than you might think. Over the last 2 weeks, over on the Fantasy Life Utilization Report, you have Jerome Ford at 45% of the snaps last week, up to 57% of the snaps this week. And you can just see he's getting used on the long down and distance, the 2-minute drill snaps, the routes run, and then getting some targets. He's purely the satellite back on this team, which isn't all that of like a coveted role, but it's a fine role. It's about a 50-50 split, which I think this is honestly more of a negative on the Chubb side, where Chubb only gets 11 opportunities in this game, 9 for Ford. Pretty much in terms of the touch distribution is about 50-50 with Ford as the satellite back here. Then our 8th takeaway, and stop me if you've heard this before, but I just can't stop talking about Justin Herbert. I can't. He has been amazing. You saw him on the primetime game last night. He has just been amazing, dude. He throws javelins. He's been running the ball more. What's he doing in terms of rushing the ball? This is what we've been talking about the last few weeks, where I have a stat at the bottom of my tweet here. He ran for over 30 rushing yards, so he now has 3 of his last 4 games of 30 or more rushing yards, despite having just 9 total in his career. So he has 9 total 30-plus rushing yards games. I don't know why I can't speak here. He has 9 total games of 30 or more rushing yards. 1/3 of those have happened in his last 4 weeks, which is crazy. So this is a new ramped-up thing. They're calling more QB design runs for him. He is moving to get first yards or first downs after the play breaks down. It's just a beautiful thing. I do think some of it's due to, in the past, him toughing out injuries, whether that's with an ankle or like last year, remember he had like the big bandage on his finger. He is an Iron Man, but we're getting a fully healthy, fully dialed in Justin Herbert right now, which is giving you a lot of rushing fantasy points. Over his last 4 games, he's been at 24, 19.5, 19.8, and then 24.4 points at quarterback. He has been lights out. Now, if you want to look at the splits before and after the bye, EPA per play, so that's just offensive efficiency, from 23rd to 12th. Neutral pass rate, 31st to 2nd, which is massive. They're throwing the ball more. They're more efficient. Herbert's points per game, QB 27 up to QB 9. And then Herbert rushing yards per game, 6 to 26.3, which is all huge. We're getting more Herbert Konami code, him running the ball. We're getting more passing, more efficiency. Everything is clicking. Herbert's a top 12 guy moving forward and one of the best quarterbacks alive. But let's talk about his weapons. That's kind of like the most impressive part. If you look at the box score and who he's throwing to, outside of Ladd McConkey, it's nothing. You have Will Dissly, who's actually like a fine fringe tight end. Like, he's a fine streamer, I would call him. This is his utilization report since the bye, right? They had a bye in week 5. He has never been under 55% of the routes. And if you hone in on just the games where he's run 60% or more, so that's week 7 through 11, he has been the tight end 11 in points per game, which is really, really good. That is about all you could ask for from a streamer. He is somebody you can definitely stream moving forward. And then I get questions about Quentin Johnston. Is Quentin Johnston's role sustainable? Well, it's tough. This is his PFF game logs. There's so much good and so much bad with QJ. All right, the good. He keeps scoring touchdowns. He scored a touchdown last night. He commanded 8 targets. That's really nice as well. The issue is that he turned 8 targets into 2 catches for 48 yards. That's not going to cut it. He had 61.4 receiving grade on the day, his like 3rd worst of the season. He benefited from Ladd McConkey getting hurt for a stretch. So I say all that to say this. You can't fully discount what Quentin Johnston's doing and say, well, it's all busted coverage. It's all just because he has Justin Herbert at quarterback. Well, at a certain point, we have to make the decision of putting him in our fantasy football lineup. And here's what I'll say. He's running routes out of circumstance because his team's receiver room is so bad, right? It is Josh Palmer, and then after that, you're talking like Jalen Reagor and Simi Fehoko, and it's just really bad. So he's running a lot of routes out of circumstance, and he's commanding about a 20% target share. And if you're going to command a 20% target share from Justin Herbert, a lot of those passes are going to be efficient or in the end zone. So he, to me, is a fine boom-bust wide receiver 3 flex play moving forward. Then we can talk about the RB split. I thought Gus Edwards would take a lot more of this than he did. On the utilization report, you can see J.K. Dobbins actually went up in terms of his snaps from 67% to 71%. Gus Edwards instead went from 25% to 17%. Still at 30% of the rush attempts. Maybe they're still easing him back in, or maybe they just never envisioned him having a bigger role than this one. So something to just kind of think about with Gus Edwards. I was expecting this to kind of go up to maybe like a clean like 60-40 split. That is not the case. I will say they insist on the Hassan Haskins brutal running back out of Michigan that just kind of gets like nepotism love from Jim Harbaugh. There is no reason whatsoever that Haskins should be active over Kamani Vidal, but that's just maybe just fantasy football bias. He gets stuffed twice at the goal line. Thankfully, Dobbins just punches it in for him. It's very much a force. I don't know why he's getting any snaps, any touches, but that is just my grievance with the staff. J.K. Dobbins, 13 opportunities, 18.9 PPR points. He's not going to get like 20 touches per game, but he's going to be efficient on like 13 to 16, and that should be just fine. And I did want to touch on the other side of this game. Chase Brown's usage since Zach Moss went down from Dwayne McFarland here. He has averaged 23.5 fantasy points per game, 83% of the snaps, 92% of the attempts, 66% of the routes, 17% of the targets, 9.9 out of 10 utilization score, averaging 28 opportunities at a high-end offense is hard to beat. Could challenge for RB1 overall rest of the way, and I would agree. If you have Chase Brown on your team, he is looking like a league winner, and I would not trade him. I am holding on to him for dear life. I've been getting a lot of those questions. Do I sell high on Chase Brown? No. When you have a league winner in your hands, you ride it. Then we have the 9th takeaway here. Let's talk about the Chiefs-Bills game, in particular, the wide receiver rotations of both sides. We have the Bills, right? No Keon Coleman, no Dalton Kincaid, and Amari Cooper comes back for the first time in a couple of weeks. Well, Amari Cooper ran just 24 of the routes, 24 of 45, so like about a little over 50% of the routes. That's not going to cut it. He needs to get up to like 75% plus to be startable on a week-to-week basis, so he needs to kind of stay out of lineups until he gets to that number. Just 3 of the targets, not great either. Khalil Shakir, leading target earner here. I will say, though, Curtis Samuel running more routes than Amari Cooper and getting more targets than Amari Cooper was not on my bingo card for this Sunday. Now, 31 routes of 45, that's not really going to do it in terms of being a startable asset, but in a weak league, or in a week for waivers, I don't mind Curtis Samuel as a small ad. They have a bye week in week 12. You kind of see what happens on the other side of it. And then you also have, Dawson Knox see what happens on the other side of it. And then you also have Dawson Knox getting 6 targets with Dalton Kincaid out. That is very, very good for a tight end. So now we know moving forward. I mean, it was already kind of a given, but any week that Kincaid is out, Knox is a fine start. I know he only gave you 4 catches for 40 yards, but it's a really good Chiefs defense, and 6 targets is about all you could really ask for when you get to the streaming tight end category. Now, on the Chiefs side of things, of course, more of Mahomes just absolutely sinking fantasy football lineups. You didn't have the balls to start Bo Nix over Mahomes this week, most likely. He gave you 3 passing touchdowns, but shout out to Kyle Borg. I don't even know how to say the rest of his name. But it was the 3rd fewest fantasy points in a 3-touchdown game ever, just in front of Mac Jones and just in front of Brian Hoyer and Jared Goff. So not great. 196 yards, 2 picks. Hate to see that. But then we also have the receiver rotation here we can talk about. Juju Smith-Schuster is pretty brutal for this whole operation. I'll just be honest. Juju Smith-Schuster runs 11 routes. DeAndre Hopkins, 18 routes. Justin Watson, 19. Worthy, 25. The leading route runner, 25 of 34. That's going to get you like 75%. So this is a 5-man rotation. A full-on rotation. Now, I do want to look up real quick how much this was affected by slot usage. You know, if Hopkins is purely a big slot and then Juju's also a purely big slot, you know what? They combined for 18, 11, so what's that going to be? Like 29 of 34 routes? That's pretty brutal. If they are kind of splitting up the big slot snaps, that is not going to be good. So I'm actually checking right now who led the Chiefs this week in slot snaps ran. I would assume, man, I hope it's not like an even split. If it's an even split, let's see. So in terms of the Chiefs, slot snaps, they actually both didn't run slot snaps. They are not many. You have Kelsey with 11. Justin Watson was actually the main slot guy at 10. Then Noah Gray at 8. Worthy at 7. Hopkins at 6. Juju at 3. So they're just using everybody. But you do have Hopkins 16 on the outside, 12 on the outside for Juju. So they were actually more being used as like pure X perimeter type receivers. That's interesting. I think that's less scary than if they were both just kind of splitting this slot role with Watson and Worthy as the perimeter receivers. But now that there's just kind of this receiver rotation where they're playing like positionless basketball, thankfully they lost. So moving forward, they're going to have to like cut this down. I don't know how you get to 19 Justin Watson routes over Hopkins at 18. I don't know why Hopkins wouldn't be leading the team in routes run. I guess Watson just knows the playbook better, but that's a big downgrade for Hopkins. If this sticks for Hopkins, where Juju kind of muddies things up and, 18 of 34 routes run is not going to cut it as someone to start in your lineup every single week, that's a downgrade. So we'll see how this split looks moving forward. It's something to monitor moving forward and something to downgrade DeAndre Hopkins for. Then I have my last takeaway here. Usually we do the Thursday night game, but everyone talks about the Thursday night game. I just didn't really feel like it this week. I had one last usage trend I wanted to talk about that I just wanted to squeeze in here instead. This is from Ryan Heath. Shout out to Ryan Heath. He's been on the channel before. One of the brightest up-and-comers, I would say. Or, I used to call him an up-and-comer, but I think that he has more Twitter followers than me. But Ryan Heath is really good. At RyanJ_Heath. And this is a really good observation because last year, without Kupp for most of the year, the Rams became a team that before this, right, when they had Cooper Kupp and his monster year, they would pass the ball a ton inside the red zone, which led Cooper Kupp to those monster touchdown totals. Then last year, McVay, good coach, so he alters things to kind of how the league is, how his team is, the scheme fits of his team versus the defenses. And he said, you know what, we're going to use Kyren Williams in the red zone, which led to 15 touchdowns for Kyren Williams in 12 games. Well, now, with Kupp healthy, with Puka healthy, you can see in games with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua active, the Rams drop back 69.2% of the time inside the 10-yard line, second most in the NFL. Across their other 5 games, it was just 41.4%, seventh least. Kyren Williams' rushing touchdown streak ended the same week Nacua and Kupp returned. So, in the red zone, they're going to be relying much more on Stafford and the 2 receivers, giving upgrades to Kupp and Puka as top 12 receivers moving forward, and then probably Stafford as well. I think Stafford had 4 passing touchdowns where he just becomes, instead of being a back-end QB2, he becomes a fine high-end QB2, even a streamer, depending on matchup. So all that's good for the receiving game and the passing game, not so much for Kyren. Now, Kyren can still get receiving touchdowns there. The issue is that he's not going to be explosive like Saquon, where, of course, in the red zone, Hurts is kind of taking a lot of those tush pushes, but it doesn't matter because Saquon's scoring touchdowns from 40 yards out. Kyren doesn't have that in his bag. So I would now probably downgrade Kyren from someone that was a top 5 running back rest of season, top 6 to probably a back end RB1 as like a, like the RB11, RB12 moving forward. Now, that is going to do it for us today. Our top 10 lessons learned for week 11 as we look forward to week 12. As always, shout out to Underdog Fantasy for keeping the lights on down here in the basement. I will say, a few days ago, the basement is completely finished. It's just now a matter of me cleaning everything up and getting the lights back. But you should see slowly but surely the basement will be getting life breathed into it, where you can now see you're going to get some lights going. You're going to get a different jersey in the background. Things are going to look better here moving forward. Just bear with me as always. But if you enjoy the content, make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code ROUNDTHEM your first deposit up to $1,000. You can find links to that in the description and the comment section down below. And as always, if you're already signed up there or you're just not interested, leave a like. Helps us out a ton. And subscribe if you're new. And I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold,